I told you he was good. See, I'm always right. A few things I just need to clarify before I get into my rebuttal. I'm not going to use this time to actually rebut what was just said. I'll use that in the cross-examination portion. However, I never once said that entheogens do not appear in early Christianity at all. Jerry, who actually helped edit the chapter for my forthcoming book, should know very well that I think entheogens were part of Christianity. I also never said that these entheogens do not appear in text. Of course they do. What I'm talking about is the specific painting of mushrooms into images that does not appear anywhere. Like, nobody ever talked about this. So this is the first image that appears in Jerry's book. It's from the Roslyn Chapel. Now, this is actually how it appears, I should say. Well, when I go here, and I noticed a little something here, and you all tell me again, you don't have to listen to me, just what do your eyes tell you? You see this little line of demarcation right here, this unnatural line that doesn't appear here? Well, when you don't have that line, this is what it actually looks like. Now, I am not a computer artist, but I assure you this is an accurate representation when you do not put, the line there. Paul Stamets says this is a taxonomically correct Amanita muscaria. Does anybody in this room think this is a taxonomically correct Amanita muscaria? Anybody? Of course not. I guess, are we all better mycologists than Paul Stamets? Of course not. What the difference here is the first category that these errors fall into, which is over-enthusiasm, pareidolia, to see a mushroom where none exists. That is what it actually looks like without the line of demarcation. The next is an interesting piece because it is the only piece ever put forth by any advocate of the holy mushroom theory that actually does show mushrooms. And it's from the Basilica de Apuleio. This image appears in Jerry's book, excuse me. But I noticed a little something about this. I don't know, those orange tops and yellow bottoms, they kind of reminded me more of the Amanita caesarea, which is a delectable dinner gourmet mushroom. Once again, to reiterate, don't believe me. Which one does that actually look more like? The muscaria or the caesarea? The Canterbury salter, this is one of my favorites because I, again, used to think these were mushrooms as well. The problem with these being mushrooms is this. This is Jesus or God creating the mushrooms, right? Psilocybin, Amanita, as Jerry said. And then we have Eve and Adam eating from the forbidden fruit, right? With that kind of mushroomy shape. See, there's a big problem with this because if these trees are supposed to represent mushrooms, then why did the artist decide that after Eve and Adam were kicked out of paradise, the trees would look exactly like the ones in the garden? Because this is just a design, believe it or not. There were artistic and creative people in the ancient world, and medieval world, and there was actually a school called the Winchester School, which was famous for its creative designs. Further, we can't look at the Canterbury Psalter in a vacuum because the same team that put this together put together another Psalter, the Edwin Paris Psalter. Now, doesn't that look familiar? Doesn't that kind of look like this scene right here, just kind of redone? Yeah, because this is just how the artists drew trees. It's just an artistic style. It has nothing to do with mushrooms. If somebody wants to say that somebody ate mushrooms and that affected how they drew trees, I don't have a problem with that. I think I'm going to show you in my closer that there's actually evidence for that. Another problem in the Allegro interpretation is that they pull from non-devotional works. John Rush, if you're familiar with his work, says that these images do not appear in secular works. This is an encyclopedia about weasels and mice. Are we supposed to believe that these mice are going to eat these mushrooms and go have Jesus enlightenment? Or is it more probable that this is just an artistic style? Here we see it again with the lore of the Tigris. Don't those look like mushroom trees? They're not. The lore of the Tigris is completely secular, having absolutely nothing to do with Amanita muscarias or any other mushroom. These images appear in nature. Purple tops, green tops with white bottoms. This was when I was just down in Ashland. I think that, which I just took a picture of the side of the road, looks more like these trees than any Amanita. This is the best one, because I did say to Jerry, that I agreed that his interpretation of this was the best back at Exploring Psychedelics. But then I had the esteemed privilege of getting to walk the streets of London with Sir Michael Crowley smoking a joint on our way to the British Museum. That's us. And while we were at the British Museum, we were debating art. Do not debate art with Mike Crowley, he will kick your ass. Learn from my mistake. But what I did notice in this old Assyrian art was that something looked real familiar to me, and this is the actual origin of the supposed mushroom tree, the Assyrian parasol. Look familiar? This is what every single supposed mushroom tree is based off of. It is uncommon today, but in the old world it was very common, and here's where context matters. This is the sign of victory for people, okay? And it went from Assyria to Rome. From Rome, it made its way into coinage, to the east, right? All the way to knights, manuals. I guess knights were eating Amanita muscaris running into battle. Is that what this means? Look, and you see at the top here, the cross? The standard came to represent Jesus' victory over paganism. There it is, once again, here it is in, again, same kind of parasol. You can still see it has the parasol top. I made a mistake years ago. I thought that those tops represented fruit-bearing trees. They don't. They represent the fact that this is Christ's victory over paganism. Here's another image of that. Same thing. We see the top kind of looks like the plain Corral fresco. It's not. These are trees. So, why do we think these look like mushrooms? Because they're really parasols. I used to agree with Jerry. I think in the very least, I have found at least a convincing rebuttal to the notion that they are mushrooms. Furthermore, most people are not familiar with the Gospel of Mark because most people are not Bible scholars. I am very familiar with the Gospel of Mark, and I can tell you that this painting was actually taken from the Gospel of Mark. I know this because the Gospel of Mark is a war gospel, and something that everybody gets wrong. They call this the triumphal entry. This was not a triumphal entry. It was supposed to represent the opposite of Caesar coming in from the other side. I don't have too much time to get into it. I have a big argument about this in my forthcoming book. It just shows this was just, it's Christ's victory over paganism. There's another one. Oh, and I don't want to go there yet. No, I'm done? Okay, I had more to say on that, but I return the time to Jerry. Thanks for listening.
I've done a lot of work in my other field in nuclear energy and showing the carcinogenic effects of normal emissions from reactors. And the scientist who led this, the radiation physicist, everybody was comfortable with the cancer argument, but then he started seeing radiation everywhere. It's the lowering of the IQ scores. It's this, it's that. And it sort of undermined it. And I think what Tom is accurately pointing out is there are some people in this argument who do see mushrooms everywhere. And when a analysis in the historical context would quickly disabuse you of that, and Tom has been excellent in that, and this is why I've called for an interdisciplinary committee on the psychedelic studies to really evaluate our findings and other findings. But I am absolutely convinced of our findings, and if you would spread that yellowish image, you could spread it out over all parts of the green man and come up with a Rorschach test of various things. We also found in Roslyn, Sir William Sinclair left us a distinct clue to Esdras in the Apocrypha, where Esdras is led out by God, and God gives him a drink that looked the color of fire and brought wisdom into his breast. And he wrote for 40 days. So there are both textual, and I would definitely rely on the judgment of the eminent mycologist Paul Stamets. One of the big problems here is Tom is working off of digital images, even in the case of Samarini. Often these are inaccurate in terms of color and rendering, sometimes corrupted. We're going to work off the original photos that we took. Every photo in our book, except for those that are of Wasson, which we received from the Wasson archives, was taken on site in the church. And that's why as an anthropologist, and anthropology by nature is an interdisciplinary field, we insist on on-site fieldwork. In one of his chapters, Tom says, well, is this an Amanita? Referring, oh Tom, could you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Which slide do you need?
We can just get that thing back up there.
Yeah, your slides? Oh, works for your slides. See, the gods are even against me.
You guys feel great.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
That's all him.
So Tom says, hey, is the red, white fleck top? Oh, you have to.
Oh, got it.
This is the Samarini image that Tom showed. Oops.
The next one?
Yeah. This is the actual photo that we took, Julie and I, on site in Plain Corralt. And then we had it digitally colored enhanced, not to alter it, but to bring out both contrast and the colors. And this is what it looks like. Now, let's talk about, first of all, is the brown stalk, the additional branches, the sheer size, the fact that there's no veil, a reason to dismiss it? As I've said, Amanitas can have a veil or they can't have a veil. In Romanesque art, size matters. The large image of the mushrooms in Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. So this is a plus. This is not a negative. This is the medieval artists are telling us this is really important. We're making it as big, a little bigger than Adam and Eve. Second, there's no development at this point in art history of depth of field or perspective. That didn't come until the 15th century, 1415 to be precise. So these branches can be the artistic rendering of mushrooms growing in clusters, which they do. Remember, this is no more a taxonomically true representation of the Amanita muscaria than it is of Adam and Eve. Next, Tom goes and says, hey, maybe this is an apple. Well, he even dismisses that for a variety of reasons, but I don't think that any artist would draw half an apple and impale it on the trunk of a tree and that it would be unprecedented in Western art. So Tom discards the apple theory, could be. Before we go on, I'd like to look and suggest that the white dots on the mushroom cap alone qualify it as an Amanita. There are several ways these dots can be made. First, by painting the white dots on the red cap. Second, by leaving the white of the plaster and painting around it. Or third, and probably the most difficult, by scraping away the red pigment after painting the cap and thereby incising the dots into the cap. In any case, these dots are a meticulous detail. And in a sense, Panofsky violated his own principles of analysis as spelled out in his wonderful classic work, Studies in Iconology. He says, look, here's what you do. There's 3 stages. Just look at the facts, devoid of anything else. Well, we've got a big mushroom, we got a naked man and woman, and a snake round around it. Okay, those are the facts. Secondly, add cultural insights. Well, it's in a medieval church with a man and a woman standing next to some kind of tree around which is a serpent offering something to the woman. This is a pretty good bet. This is the temptation scene from the Garden of Eden. What's Panofsky's third level? Here's where the iconology comes in. We need to look at the work of art as the product of a unique time period and ask, why did the artist choose to represent the temptation in this way? Here is where the art historians, and we also, synthesizes everything and asks, what does this all mean? And even Panaski fails in calling this a stylized Italian tree. And he's not the only one, I'm not the only one who holds this view that it is not an Italian tree. I think some very eminent people do. Both ethnobotanist Richard Evan Schultes and pharmacologist Albert Hoffman observed the plain corral tree, that the tree of knowledge, quote, entwined by a serpent, bears an uncanny resemblance to the Amanita muscaria mushroom. Samarini, an Italian ethnobotanist, took multiple representations of mushroom trees, all of which have umbrella-shaped foliage, and none of which resembles the uplifted branches of the Italian pine. And researcher Michael Hoffman, his website is Ego Death, posted a photo gallery online showing the marked similarities between mushroom trees and actual mushrooms in nature. In fact, having been at the Wasson Libraries, I have a subsequent letter. I have that letter in my hand that Panofsky wrote to Gordon Wasson, in which he even admitted, hey, you know, it could be a mushroom after all. I'm not, and this is written in May 12th, 1952. His first letter was May 2nd. He said, the only possibility I should be prepared to admit is that once the transformation had taken place and was naturally accepted in art, some especially ignorant craftsmen may have understood the finished product as a real mushroom. In other words, maybe I got all this Italian pine tree, but maybe some really dumb craftsmen misunderstood what it was supposed to do and made it a mushroom. In anthropology, we have something called the emic approach and the etic approach. The etic approach is we, as observers, putting our categories onto a particular culture. The emic approach is how they see it. Tom's ultimate point is the fruit doesn't matter, it's the fall. It's what this is really about is humanity's disobedience. And here, I think, is where Tom makes his most glaring, one of his most glaring errors. And that is, the fall is a New Testament interpretation of what's happening in the creation myth of the Old Testament in Genesis. And once you remove that, then this argument that that's what this was about goes away. Because in my conclusion, I would present Julie and my reinterpretation of plain Kuralt as a basis for reinterpreting what's really going on in the Garden of Eden. Oh, one more minute? Oh, why didn't you tell me this? I'm sure you were trying to tell me. You know, I'm kind of, when Tom says this is an apple or the fruit doesn't matter, I'm kind of reminded of the old, there was a debate in the Gore-Bush debates, and the vice presidents debated. And Bush's vice president, Quayles, compared himself to President Kennedy during the 1988 campaign. And Senator Lord Benson shot back, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy. And to Tom, I would say, I've eaten apples. In fact, they're my favorite fruit. Lots of apples. And I've ingested soma, LSD, peyote, and psilocybin. And all as I can say to anyone who's done entheogens and apples can tell the difference. For surely, that's no apple. Or as I would say to the apple, I've eaten lots of entheogens, and you're no entheogen.